Some things just don't go as you planned. But the cool thing is, sometimes when you pivot, that thing turns into something better than what you expected. This week, there's a new album from Wednesday 13 called Mid-Death Crisis coming out. And when I got a chance to speak to Wednesday, I wanted to ask him all about horror punk, because you might know him from the Murder Dolls. But once I did ask him about it, the conversation went into a different direction, and we wound up talking about what it's like to be a weirdo in the South and growing up in a religious family and liking this kind of music. And Wednesday had insightful answers, and it was just fun. So I'm glad it went the way it did, and I'm not going to set it up any more than that. Here is Wednesday 13. Wednesday 13, welcome to Heavy Metal Philosophy.
Hello. And on a Wednesday.
Yes. So I live in this extreme metal bubble, and I've been trying to branch out, so to speak. I've been trying to learn more, and I feel like a good place to go out on the alternative scene limb, I should say, is, horror punk, goth, death rock, that sort of thing. And I figure who better to ask than one of the top people in what I would like to call the second wave of horror punk, yourself, Wednesday 13. What is horror punk?
Horror punk was a term that I didn't know was a term until my band called it in our first review in 1996. Sending out, our first CD to these local magazines or national. We send out stuff everywhere. And I remember getting a review, and it was like the horror punk sounds of my band. And I was like, well, that's a cool description. And I think a lot of people would think that horror punk for me, or the whole idea of what I do, probably came from the Misfits. And I would probably think the same thing, but it's not at all. Like I didn't hear the Misfits till much later in the game. My whole horror punk or whatever sound I had was influenced by Alice Cooper when I heard him do all these horror rock songs, and I went, but he didn't do it all the time. So I was obsessed with all of his horror, Dead Baby songs, I Love the Dead, that kind of stuff. I loved it. And then I loved the Ramones. And then I heard the Ramones do these nursery rhyme type kind of songs, like, and then they had a Texas Chainsaw Massacre song. And it was so mixing that, I sounded like Alice Cooper, and I could play punk rock songs. So I just started singing about what I knew. And I looked around my surroundings, and I love horror movies, and that created this horror punk sound for myself. And then, of course, now everyone knows Misfits are the founders of the horror punk thing. But I didn't know anything about it, which I love that. So I think that's what really separates me from a lot of the horror punk bands, because a lot of those bands started with that influence of the Misfits. You can't help but have those big whoa parts in the songs. And I only have 20 years of Wednesday 13. I probably only have 3 songs that have maybe a whoa chant in it like that. And I've always kind of strayed away from it just because of that. That's not my thing, but I do it occasionally. Do it on the new record. So I get one in there.
Yeah. So that's cool, because it answers a question that I had for later, because your sound is quite a bit different from what I would call that first wave. You got the Cramps, you got TSOL, you've got the Misfits, and they had a heavy influence from the original rock, the 50s rock, Elvis, doo-wop, and your sound and some of your contemporaries, you have more influence from classic, like you called Alice Cooper. I'd say the 80s hard rock. And I wouldn't even, from what little I've heard of your new record, Mid-Death Crisis, which is out April 25th, it's a lot heavier. It's leaning more on the metal side, hard rock. So that answers that question.
I've just, like you said, all and I love TSOL, Misfits, Cramps, especially the Cramps, one of the most underrated. I hope they get their due, like the Ramones and the Stooges but yeah, I got into those bands later, but I I'm a hair metal guy. I grew up, I mentioned all the bands like Motley Crue and Twisted Sister and Wasp because that's the bands that people know when I mention it. But I was in all the obscure third wave of the hair metal bands, like After Warrant and Poison. I had every band on cassette that was, I'm talking like bands like Bang Tango and the Bullet Boys and all these bands. So that type of music is the core of what my sound is. I mean, there's nothing different than that music except the lyrics. And that's what I know, and that's what I really kind of zoned in on. So for me, of that era, I always liked the dirtier type, kind of sleazier bands. Like Guns N' Roses kind of came in and made a band like Whitesnake look dumb because they looked tough and they had leather jackets and they were holding Jack Daniels bottles. And I was like, that's the kind of band. So that was those type of hair metal glam sleaze rock bands were the inspiration and still are the core of what I do. So that's why I sound a little different than what your typical, I think, what horror punk is.
Yeah, but both the first wave and the second wave have sort of a reverence for rock and roll. And I can definitely hear that in yours. And I'm glad too, because it seems like there's a real lack of, metal is thriving right now, but straight up rock and roll is
it's the dying breed. It's never going to die, but it's a dying breed. And I mean, it's just like I tell people all the time, what I'm doing is not new. It's not at all. But being that it's not being done by everyone else, when people hear this for the first time, it sounds brand new to them because they don't hear this anymore. It's like, whoa, what is that? It's not modern music now. I love it. And like I said, all those bands you mentioned, they loved all the early rock and roll stuff. Well, when I listened to the hair metal bands and I wanted to know what they sounded like, and then I started reading about their influences, and Motley Crue's listing all the glam rock bands from the 70s, Sweet and Slade and T-Rex. And I'm like, who were those bands? So I went in and found those bands. So, and now that's influenced my music. So it's just been discovering what my influences were.
Yeah. And it's really cool for me to do that same exercise because I'm seeing the Venn diagram. So, the metal scene where I'm from, and then the goth scene, and then the punk scene, and then right there in the middle is that love for horror movies and the macabre. It's just the one thing that unites all the scenes.
Mm-hmm. And it's all the imagery's always been there, from Black Sabbath to whatever. That little hint of darkness and death has always been the staple in this. And and that's just what I grew up on. Like I said, I'm a 80s kid. I grew up during the Satanic Panic. My parents were checking my records and making sure it wasn't backwards masking and pentagrams on it. And so I'm glad I grew up during that time. It was just such a unique time to grow up. It's so different now, and I hate that I sound like back in my day, but that's it. But that's what made me who I am. I don't know that I could do this the same way if I was a new person. It wouldn't work. The ingredients wouldn't be the same.
I definitely can relate to that because I grew up in the South. I live in the South now. So in many ways, while some people refer to the Satanic Panic as a thing of the 80s and the 90s, in many ways, it's still around down here, and I can definitely relate to my parents like, over my shoulders, like, are you going to go to hell for listening to this? But that definitely gave it it made it tempting, even more tempting.
Well, exactly. And that's what tempted me. Like I said, I'm from North Carolina. So I grew up in my parents checking my records and watching all those religious shows on Sunday mornings, the Jim and Tammy Faye show. And we got to check these records and make sure he's not drawing pentagrams on his notebook. And I did. I had pentagrams on my notebook. I watched a kid do it in class. And I went, I could do that. I didn't even know what it meant. I didn't know what's called a pentagram. I just called it a star. But anything that struck fear in my parents made me want to do it more. Can't help it. Love my parents to death, but just that was the rebellion and the rock and roller in me to do that. And growing up in the South and living in the Bible Belt where there's a church on every corner, that influenced everything I did. So I was like, all right, well, what can I do to scare these people? So I already scared my parents enough. What can I do to scare these strangers over here? What can I do to do this? And that's where the whole shock rock aspect of what I do came from and when I started doing this in like the mid 90s.
And now, have your parents gone, okay, have they turned over or are they still a little worried?
Oh, they love it. They love it. My mom's no longer here. My dad, my mom was super proud of what I did, and like they love it. I think in the early days, because I mean, again, you understand, I was 8 or 9 years old, and they were checking on me as a kid, you know. But when I started playing guitar and kept listening to this music, and they seen that I was doing more than just listening to it, it was making something out of it, and they just watched me. You know, I was very driven, and they saw me go from the little bedroom to you know, with Murder Dolls, going on tour and touring the world, and I basically proved that I could do it, and they've been so proud of me ever since. So it's a cool thing to, you know, because at first, I mean, it wasn't that they were against it; they were just protective. They were protecting me. But I don't think my parents paid attention too much as I got into my teenage years. They were too busy working jobs to worry about if I was, you know, with that kind of stuff.
That's great to hear. So you grew up, sounds like most of your childhood already, you were into this alternative lifestyle and macabre influences. And I just talked about earlier how I live in this extreme metal bubble. And I just mentioned to you, I also live in the South. I live in the middle of the woods and nowhere. So I'm
familiar with that. That's how I grew up. I lived in the woods till I was 12.
I actually moved to the city to pursue things. And then as I got older, I was like, I got to go back to the woods. But
right.
Living here, I am made keenly aware pretty regularly that I'm a weird person. Like, I'm not like the people that live around me and the people in my community. But since you are doing this for a living, and you know, your bandmates are alternative people, you're on an alternative label, you're touring. Does it ever get like normal?
Yes. I mean, as normal as it can be. Like, I don't think about it anymore. Like, you know, here in Los Angeles, me looking like this, I could go to the grocery store and there's going to be 10 people in there that make me look normal. I noticed that when I first moved here 15 years ago. You see Batman crossing the street to go to work and stand on the side. It's just different world here. But when I go on tour and when I go back to North Carolina and I go into Walmart looking like this, yeah, everyone's going to be like, who's that? But I've been doing this for so long. Like, I'm 48 years old. I dyed my hair when I was 15. I dyed it black. I've kind of looked like this for a long time. So I don't really think about it until I am back in one of those smaller places, or I'm in like a Walmart in the morning before our show and I'm getting some stuff and someone goes, "What are you? Where do you come from?" And I come from the same place you come from. You just don't know it, you know. And I'll blow people's mind when they go, "Hey, he's how are you one of us? You don't, you know." So yeah, a lot of people just, you know, it's just I've gotten used to it. It's part of the thing. I grew up watching the Addams Family, and I grew into it.
I've had that question too. What are you? And it's so, I don't know what, it's bewildering. That's the way I would put it, because I've gotten it for the way that I dress, but I've also gotten it because I'm a minority down here in the South. And the way that exact way of phrasing it, what are you? Not where are you from? What are you like? Like the fact that my eyes look a little bit different.
Yeah, I didn't mind that though, because I wanted to, that's why I went with a name like Wednesday. Like, what are you? Are you a man? Are you a woman? Are you an animal? What are you? And like, I'm me. So I don't mind it, but you know, again, when I was living in that little small bubble of North Carolina, I can see where that gets a little, because before I got out of that town, I was the only person walking around in my town that looked like this. So I was very noticeable, and I didn't necessarily want that attention. This was my look, you know?
And, you know, metal, punk, these are very niche genres, but I feel like most people like horror movies.
Mhm.
There's something really appealing about that. And I really wonder why it's so universal, and then also why some people take it just a little bit further and become fans like yourself versus a more casual fan that's still a normie in their regular life.
Because people get inspired by it. They see something like, for me, like, I watch movies. What I got inspired by movies, I took into music. And so people just, they're inspired by it. It creates it gives people imagination. When you watch a movie, you get lost in it. You're believing the story and you get lost in it. And so that's all part of it. It's just the vibe of it.
Would you say what do you think the ratio is on your inspiration from movies and music?
I would say it's probably equal, and these days it's probably even. I don't even think about the music. Just I play it. I write my songs. They come, but I look around my room and I'm like, what am I going to write about today? Oh, all right. Well, okay. I'm gonna sing about werewolves, and there we go. And but it's usually now. Before, I think I was listening in the early days. You listen to music. Oh, I want to write a song, and maybe we need to write a song like this. And now I don't even really think about it so much like that. It just kind of happens. Usually, I write songs, and it will be like, oh, this reminds me of this old song or this song by this band, that's where the influence comes from.
And the new record, Myth Death Crisis, April 25th, it has a very VHS horror movie
Mhm.
looking cover to it.
It does.
Yeah, good shot.
Yeah.
So, do you think that your fans are more appreciative of physical media than your average music fan? Because physical media seems to be, less and less these days, except for the resurgence of vinyl. But I feel like
Yeah.
your fans will probably be more appreciative because of that
My
Venn diagram.
my fans are appreciative of it, and they expect it of me, and that's why I go uh beyond it every time. Like, this is the first record where I did a 24-page booklet in it, and it's like filled with everything for this album. And it's important to me that it's part of the pic. It's part of it. It's not just the music, it's the visual. It's like, imagine if like, a lot of people see movies but they don't see the movie poster.
Mhm.
That movie poster sometimes is what I would see as a kid, and would stare at it for a month before the movie came out and just wondered what it was. I got lost in it. So I want people to do. I want them to get lost in this stuff. And we hired a real artist. This is not AI. This took, putting this together was as much work as recording the record. It's all part of the process for me. And some people don't think that's an important part. And to me, it's just as important.
It reminds me of movie nerds when the film is announced and they show the poster and they start analyzing every detail, looking for
Yep.
Easter eggs and clues, especially for like franchise films where there's history and
Mhm.
source material.
Yeah, my fans, I would say, are the type of people that wait for the credits to end and see that hidden clip at the end. And they've always expected that from me, and I always give that to them.
And the single that you released,
Mhm.
when What the Devil Commands, that was filmed in a church. And now that I know that you're a Southerner,
Mhm.
looking back on watching that video, it was a small church, which
Mhm.
really feels at home to me. Was that deliberate? Because a lot of like blasphemous music really aims more at the Catholic Church, which has these
Right.
big, grand, churches. But the small churches, that's what I'm familiar with.
Yeah, we honestly did. I'm surprised we even found a church that would allow us to do what we did. So I didn't get a choice on small, medium, or large, but it worked out perfectly for me because that's the kind of churches that I'm used to seeing. But again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this song, and being in the extreme metal world, I'm sure you know how certain people will look at certain bands in the black metal world or whatever, and they're like, oh, they're Satanists and they got to be this type of this. There's a critique to it, and there's a certain code that people live by if you're serious about that. my band has never been serious about that stuff. And that whole song talking about my parents being terrified of the music when I was a kid, that song I wrote from the point of view that if I could go back in time and plant this CD into my collection, and my mother would come in and looking through Poison and Motley Crue, and then what's this Wednesday 13? And if I could have just laid it out for her, the lyrics for When the Devil Commands, wrote out perfectly for her. That's what the song is. It's exactly what it is. It's like I wrote it as if my mother would have discovered it and it would have terrified her. Visually, what would have terrified her? Put me in a church surrounded by naked girls, 666, got a snake in it, everything my mother would be terrified of. I did it lyrically and visually. And it was all to a nod of that time. And it's as serious as that. Some people go, these lyrics are not, this is dumb. This like, it's a nursery rhyme. Again, that's what I specialize in. This was a fun, catchy, cool riff song. Leave your brain at the door. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's very chuggy riff, just dun, 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 just driving, not quite industrial, but has that familiar drive.
It could have been industrial if you would have mixed it a certain way, but that guitar riff stuff, a lot of people, for me, I think I noticed the heavy chug riffs listening to White Zombie in 1991, and which is crazy. That record came out in 1991. Just hearing the riff for like Thunder Kiss, but over time and discovering bands, I kind of realized one of the bands that really kind of started that was the band Killing Joke. So just that chug, you hear that from Thunder Kiss to Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. It's got that riff. And so I would say our song is somewhere in those worlds. And it's good. There's nothing wrong with I'm a guitar player as well. So it's just like you want to have a cool, mean sound and riff. I call that a knuckle dragger riff. You walking down the street with your knuckle dragging, you're just looking for something.
I'm hoping that the record, again, Friday, April 25th, Mid-Death Crisis, is going to be chock full of more knuckle-dragging riffs like that. Thank you so much for joining me, and good luck with the release.
Thank you for having me.